Welcome. Here we are, and day 2 of launch Q2 2021. And I am happy to be here today to talk about activity-based assessment outcomes. Well, we call them activity-based assessment or ABA assessment outcomes, but they're really outcomes of your various activities that are found within labs. My name is Brian Bork. I am a senior technical readiness trainer here with our readiness team at Learn on Demand Systems, and I am joined by my coworker Ryan, who is here to help answer any questions. As always, let's go ahead and practice good meeting hygiene, and feel free to keep your microphone muted and your camera off for the time being. We will certainly have time for a Q&A at the end, but we have time for questions as we go through, and Ryan will be monitoring and interrupting me as I present if there's anything good that comes through. So feel free to drop the questions into the chat and get us started. So every session always begins with a good reminder that you can post and win. Take a picture with you or without you in it, but a picture somehow signifying that you're attending launch. Post it in LinkedIn, Twitter, and or Facebook, and mention that you're attending launch Q2. The slide says Q1, sorry about that. It is launch Q2, that's the one you want to do. But the most important part is to make sure you tag Learn on Demand Systems. At LinkedIn, it's Learn on Demand Systems. At Twitter, it's at LOD Systems. And when you're on Facebook, it's at Learn on Demand Systems. We will pick out some of our favorites, and we will send you a lovely gift for posting that you're attending the event. All right, now that we're through with the formalities, let's go ahead and dive into our topics for today. We are going to review the basics, and when I talk about the basics, I'm going to talk about just adding questions and activities and where you go to do that. Then we're going to talk about grouping and randomizing, providing a random number of from a pool of questions. And then we're going to talk about customizing the journey, using outcomes to dictate what happens when you get something correct and what happens when you get something wrong, or not as correct, as I often stated. So we're going to do a really quick demo of the basics. We're going to talk about using questions and using automated activities. And we're going to go back to my sampler, which I am, if you've watched any of my videos, or if you have attended any of my webinars or things like that, you will recognize what we're about to see here, because I use these all the time, and I use them all the time for a good reason. They show almost every different type of question and activity that you might be able to put into a lab all in one. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. Here is my scoring sampler. I'm going to go ahead and fire it up so that you can see it, and I will make sure it fills the whole screen. Now, when we're inside of our sampler here, we have all the different types of questions and activities. But what I really want to show you is how we actually go about putting those in place, because creating and editing questions, sometimes it's sort of just a given. It's just we make an assumption that you understand how to do that. So we're going to show you really quickly here, as a lab developer, how you'd write these questions. Now, this is totally told from the point of view of a lab developer, not of the end user who's actually going to be taking this. And it's important to remember that, because when the end user is taking this, they won't necessarily see the exact same things. So this is this whole presentation is from the view of you as a lab developer creating this environment. And I'm going to go ahead and pop myself right into the video there. Okay, so here we are. We go up here to edit instructions. And then when we're in edit instructions, and I'm going to move this over and change the size a little bit, because that will help us view the questions a little bit. But If you're not familiar with Markdown, don't worry. We have a great cheat sheet here in the under the question mark or help tab. And you can see that we've got our various activities. But what I'm really going to do is I'm going to start from this point right here, which is this page that we're on in our instructions, which is multiple choice, single, and multiple answers. And when you're working in here, notice that we are personalizing this a little bit. You can always do that. You can see that it puts my first name in here because I was the one who launched this lab. And then please answer the following questions. What is 1 + 1? And name 2 types of birds. Now, 1 + 1, obviously basic math, and 2 types of birds are basic associations, I guess, if you will. So if we go in and actually take a look at what is 1 + 1 and name 2 types of birds, you can see here that one of these is actually listed as a scored item and the other is listed as a practice item. This is one of those design elements, and again, we're not going to spend too much time here, but it is important for you to know that you want to make sure that when you're giving this out or when other users are going to be taking the lab, do you want to score that lab and determine at the end, here's what you got correct? Or do you want them to be able to check themselves as they go? Now, you can combine the two, absolutely. But typically, in high stakes testing, where we get into the PBT exam certification, that type of thing, where obtaining or keeping a job is on the line for somebody who actually takes that exam or uses that lab as an exam, you typically don't want to give them a self-check to see if they're keeping up with what they did. You want to make sure that they get it done by the end of the lab, and that's it. We don't care about how they got there or whether they got this part correct, as long as they got the overall thing correct. Now, when you're dealing with lower stakes things, where you're doing more of an assessment of whether or not somebody understands a topic, that is the time where you put in what you see here, which is sort of the check as you go. But typically, if you're going to have an item like this be scored, you do not typically give them the opportunity to check their work. It is something that you typically leave that as unscored if you're going to have them check their work, or you remove the ability to do that. So how do we actually create this? We went in and edited, and we started off with a blank question, which was the text was blank and our answers were blank, and then we just added them in. They're very easy and quick to add. Now, some of these things will not always appear. Like, for example, the group only appears when you are working with a group of, when you actually have a group in your scored lab. But the choice is multiple choice, single answer, multiple choice, multiple answer. And this multiple choice, multiple answer is famous or is used quite a bit in old certification exams, where you would have to choose all or select all that apply. And often it is with the caveat of choose the best answers or answer. So you, if any of you are familiar with certifications, those were out there. Now, short answer exact match is a type of question we normally refer to as fill in blank or FIB. Very common type of question, but it is helpful with the exact match if you put that in. And I'll show you an example of what an exact match looks like here. This is right here is an example of an exact match, which is that we're looking for a particular word. So if I take a look here, the southernmost thing on Earth, we're looking for Antarctica. Now, if we wanted to be technical and correct, we could take a short answer exact match and make it case sensitive, because Antarctica as a continent is capitalized always. So we might need to match case or be case sensitive. Now, when we're saying exact match, we mean we are matching exactly what is in the answer section. So it's important to remember when you do an exact match, it is literally an exact match. It's not figuratively an exact match. We have to know, we have to get every, if you misspell this, for instance, they would have to misspell it in order for it to be correct. However, short answer regex match, provided you know your regex, which I do have to confess, I don't. I know how to specify a space. That's about it. That's about all I know about regex. But you can find many regex entries out there. But then you could put, for example, if you were saying enter an IP address and somebody just put in random numbers and didn't put dots in them, the check would come back and it would say it was incorrect just because they didn't have it in the correct format. You could have any 3 digits, a period, any 3 digits, a period. Now, the trick with an IP address is you don't necessarily have 3 digits, right? So like if they're using 10.10.10.1, for instance, it would be, it wouldn't necessarily be. So it would be up to any 3 digits, up to any dot, and then up to any 3 digits. You could put that regex entry right in there. And if we take a look here at this regex match, you can see here that we have red, white, and blue, because those are the colors of the British flag. This, by the way, was put together by a British person, so that's why it's in there as opposed to the colors of the US flag. But the answers would be the same. But you can see here that we have the ability for it to be whether or not it's capitalized, whether or not these are in any particular order, and all sorts of other things, okay? So those are examples of how we put basic questions in. So let's switch over to a basic activity. So what is an example of an activity? And now, when we call it an activity, we're referring to what we call automated activities. Now, automated activities don't necessarily mean that they're automated. They may have to be triggered, but it does mean that they go out and dynamically check things. So one of the most common ones that I use as an example is to check to see whether or not somebody has created a file on the desktop. So let's take a look at that. First of all, let's get over to the question, which is right here. Create a file on the desktop, or called test.txt on the desktop, and then there's a button there to check for file creation. Now, once again, we could make this activity be something that's scored. And then if we're going to make something that's scored, then we would typically not allow them to check to see whether or not it's done. We just have to make the assumption that they go on to the next part that they've done it, but we're going to check to see whether it's done, and then we're going to give them a 1 or a 0. If they didn't put the text file on the desktop, then we're going to give them a 0, and if they did, we're going to get them a 1. If they put a file called temp.txt on the desktop, they're going to get no partial credit or anything like that. They're going to get a 0 because they did not put test.txt on the desktop. So let's take a look at this automated activity. It works the exact same way as a question. You add it in as an activity, but when you add an activity, which is right down here at the bottom, it, instead of being a new question, which is the 4 options that I showed you, now we're doing a automated activity. So you just give it a name. You give the instructions, which are, we'd like you to create a file on desktop, or, we have put a certain number of files on the desktop. Can you go to the 3rd file that's named this and find this information? And whether or not it's going to be scored, whether or not it's part of a group, if you have groups. And then, are you going to have more than one script? You can see here that we've got script 1. We can add script 2. So we can actually have a collection of things that needs to be done. For example, one of our most commonly demonstrated Cloud Slice labs is how to go about putting in storage account and containers in Azure. We show that one a lot during our feature demos and so on. That has 3 different scripts in it, and then if you do those correctly, you could have a score for script 1, a score for script 2, and a score for script 3. If you do all 3 of those, you get a total of 3. If you only do 2 of those, you get a total of 2. You, the lab developer, the instructional designer, get to make the choice of, is this going to be good enough? Is 2 out of 3 good enough? Or do you really need 3 out of 3 in order to be successful? So that's how you put in an automated activity. So those are the basics. Let's go back to the slides real quick, and then we're going to take a look at a couple of other things. So throwing monkey wrenches. And I use the term monkey wrenches here because that ties in with our whole thought of chaos monkey, who is a very naughty monkey, a very cheeky monkey. But I just imagine him having some wrenches and throwing them sort of like in dodgeball. Just remember, the most important rule number 1, any predictable pattern can be memorized. If you give people the same question with the same answers in the same order, those people are going to go, oh, it's the third one. And then they can pass that information on to others. Hey, if you're going to go take this test or go take this scored lab, the first answer is the third one. The second answer is the first one. And that can be memorized quite easily in most cases. So change things up in your exam. You can do something simple like just changing the order in which the answers appear. Believe it or not, that actually makes a lab more challenging. So you can randomize not only the questions of a pool, like we'll talk about in a second, but you can randomize the answer order so that the first answer, second answer, third answer, fourth answer won't always be in that order. They will always randomly be in a different, or they will always be in a random order. Now, that doesn't mean that somebody wouldn't get the exact same exam as somebody else. So they'd say, well, in mine, it was the third answer. And so somebody goes and takes the test and they're like, hey, that's the right answer. The third answer is the right answer. It happens. Randomization is still, based on numeric randomness. And if your pool size is small enough, you're still probably going to likely get that question. Whether or not you get that question first is completely random as well. So then, instead of just randomizing the answers, you can actually randomize the questions. And what I love to point out here is that it is very, very common to have a pool of general questions and then pick a random amount, or not a random amount. You're picking the same amount, but you're picking out random questions from that pool. And so let's say you have a pool of 10 questions. You're going to pick out 3 of those questions and give it. The bigger that pool is, the less likely that you're going to get repeats very often. It is not that people won't get the same question. It's that they won't get the same first question. And as they go through, it'll be less likely that they get those questions in any of the same order. If you throw that in with random answers, you truly get a feeling of randomness. And the actual outcome of the test can be varied. So then, if you use the concept of predictability and the pattern being recognized, and you shake it up a little bit, then you can throw in the concept of outcomes. And outcomes are really what we're here to accentuate. Outcomes are the ability for us to be able to take a incorrect answer or a correct answer and either set a variable or be able to direct the user to another page within your instructions. So let's take a look at these a little bit more in depth. Changing up scoring, grouping together similar types of questions together behind the scenes. This is great for when you want to get X out of Y correct. So if you want to test somebody on installation, configuration, backup, recovery, you're going to test them on each of those sections. Each of those sections would be a group. You put a pool of questions in each of those groups, and then you must get at least this many right on installation, but you only need to get that many right on backup, for instance. Randomizing the pattern, changing the order of the questions, and change the order of the questions within the group. Now, it isn't just a order of questions. It's which questions actually get put into place. And then activity outcomes. You can use these in a couple of ways. One of them, ensure that your learners don't waste time. If you are doing a assessment of somebody's skill and you want to make sure that you start off with beginner level questions or activities and say, hey, go in and create a text file, fairly beginner level thing. If they get that correct, move it up to something harder. If not, then give them something else that's equally complex, or something at the same level of difficulty. Or think about this: you start at an intermediate level, and you're like, all right, can they read this document and verify variables within it? If so, give them a harder question. If they can't, then go down, have them create a text file and put certain text in there, and then take them back up to another question of the same difficulty as going into the log file. So the concept of using an activity-based outcome, activity-based assessment outcome, gives you the ability to be able to analyze whether or not people are dynamically analyze, building up that challenge-centric learning so that they're constantly being challenged, but not to the point where they can't win. All right. But you have to take into account that pathway that they might take to what score they might get in order to make sure that they get enough score to be able to win, in order to solve or get a passing score. So now that's one way of using it. Another way to use it is to use the question to set a variable that you can then use in your instructions or scripting or other questions or other activities. You set that variable and it's now available to that lab completely. All right. So let's take a look at what you can do to combine all these pieces. First of all, randomizing questions within a group. And when we talk about randomizing questions within a group, we're just talking about making a group and then checking the randomized field. But if you do that, inside of there, you can have outcomes that will take them to different branches. So you ask a random question at level 2. Then you're going to, if it's incorrect, you're going to take a random question from the level 1 group. If they get it correct, then you're going to take them to a random question of the level 3 group. But the key to remember is that you are not really necessarily scoring them here. You're trying to determine whether or not their skill level is accurate to whatever it is that you're going to be teaching them. Or, as we've talked about, sometimes you could adjust this on the fly so that their instructions change based on whether or not they get a question right. You take them to a certain path, and all of a sudden now, here's the instructions they're going to get. And of course, I mentioned before the chaos monkey, and especially with break fix. Click a button, have 1 out of 5 random issues break the current lab, and then have the user fix it. But then based on the chaos monkey, based on what one of those 5, you have to know which fix of the 5 to check for. So for example, if you have breaking a network or changing a user account, these are all possible things that could break. If you break the network, you have to know to check to make sure the network is fixed, not to check to see whether or not the user account is correct. So you can really get super sophisticated with all of the technology that's out there. So let's take a quick look at what it takes to put in outcomes and the grouping and randomization. So let's end our slideshow here. We're going to stay in the scoring sampler for this demonstration because one of the things that we want to show is the activity group. So how does the activity group itself work? If we go back into edit our instructions and I resize this once again and move it around and go into our activities, you will see at the first, at the top, groups appear. By the way, groups always appear at the top. So if you have multiple groups, those will always be at the top, even though you may call them much later in your documentation. It won't necessarily appear until you make the call for it. So here is multiple choice single answers, and we go in and look at our group here, and our group has the choice of randomizing. Now, when we say randomizing, if we don't say randomizing, it's going to give us the entire set of all three questions. So I'm going to save this, and you'll notice all three questions now appear here in the instructions. All right. However, if I go back in and change this randomize, I can say how many of those activities I want to display. So I can go anywhere from 1, which now gives me one random one, which you can see here is the 1 plus 3, or I can go in and randomize 2, and then I've still got my 1 plus 3, but I also have my 1 plus 1. Now, that very easily could have been either 1 plus 2 or the 1 plus 3 could have been replaced with a 1 plus 2, or instead of getting 1 plus 1, I could have gotten 1 plus 2. Adding a new question or taking a question that is outside of this and putting it into the group is very easy. All you have to do is just check this. But while I'm in here, let's talk about randomizing my answers, because we talked about that as well. So here is the name the 2 types of birds. Notice the order it's in: cow, eagle, dog, chicken. Now we'll switch back to the instructions. And if I click on randomize answer sequence and save and close, and I'll just refresh here. Now, here we go. So eagle, dog, chicken, cow. Let's go back into our instructions here. Oops. I guess I closed my instructions. Sorry about that. There we go. So we're back in our instructions here, and we're going to go look at our questions once again. And if we go in and take a look at, oh, here's my 2 types of birds is in my group now. You notice that the order that they were first in is cow, eagle, dog, chicken. Now they're appearing in this other order. So if I uncheck that, the randomize goes away. And if I take it out of the group, you'll notice that it's no longer in our group category over here. Now, when I added that to my group, let me go back in and do that again. Where is it? You can move to the bottom. Yes, it did. So if I go back in and put this into my group and save and close, I can refresh this as the lab developer, and I can see if I can get that question to appear in my instance here. But I think once it's been set, it doesn't show you an update to that. So that's the one thing that doesn't necessarily change. But now that I have 4 possible, I can go in, edit my instructions, and change my activity so that instead of showing 2, I'll show 3, and save and close and move over. And look, there it is. It appeared. Now, again, that could have been 1 plus 1 instead of that one. So all sorts of possibilities of randomizing and grouping. Now, we're going to change to a different example to talk about outcomes, because while this example does have outcomes, it doesn't have them, it doesn't have the as deep of a example. So I'm going to show you a slightly different lab for that. But before I do that, I just want to change this back so that it is no longer a part of this category. All right. And I'll end this one and go back into, I'll cancel. Activity outcomes. This one is specifically set up just for outcomes. And I'll bring it forward here. And here we go. So here's a simple question. What is 1 plus 1? So what happens if we get this one wrong? Let's say that we can't, or we're pretty bad at math, and we say 3. Notice I didn't even have to click on next, but it brought me here and said, all right, you know, that was your final answer, so you got it wrong. Notice we're in the still simple category, and now it says, well, what is 2 plus 2? Well, let's just say, well, maybe the last one wasn't 3. Let's go ahead and say this one is. Notice I get a thanks for playing, and that's it. That's all I get. That's my only choices. Now, the reason I got those answers and the reason I only got those choices was because of what we call outcomes. And you're going to see here that it's got to go through and do my grading, which will take a second. But let's take a look at our instructions while we're waiting. You will see that we have put in here an activity-based outcome, which is at the bottom of any question or activity. And it's important to remember that this can be done with activities as well. If somebody gets an activity correct, they did put a test file on the desktop, you can take them to a different page or set a variable. So we're using sort of a path here. If somebody answers the first question correctly, we take them to page 4, which is harder. If they answer it incorrectly, we take it to 3, which is still simple. That's page 3. So if we take a look at our instructions here, you can see here, here's page 1 up at the top. And then anytime you see a triple equals, that means that it's a page break. So our first page is going to be named simple. Our second page is going to be named still simple. I'm sorry. Our second page is simple. Our third page is still simple. Fourth page is harder. And fifth page is also harder. Okay. So when we navigate this, we can take people to a specific point in our instructions. And you may not have noticed it, but I used a theme so that I removed the navigation bar that allowed them to go back. So once they've answered a question and answered it correctly or incorrectly, it's led them down a path and it's gotten them to hopefully a point where they get something either correct or incorrect. Now, the interesting thing here is no matter what happens, well, I shouldn't say no matter what happens, we want them to get to the end of the document, but we can be tracking their score and their progress and their information as they go through. And then at the end, we can have a automated activity which says, do I have this variable equal to this number or higher, and then give them a result of a pass or fail based on that number. You don't even have to use the whole concept of scoring these as they go along, although you could do that as well. But when you're doing scoring with the outcomes, especially with this type of path, it is a little bit trickier to keep track of what somebody's score might be, because I only got 2 questions and maybe I need 4 out of those questions. Or let's say there's 4 questions total. I'm only seeing 2 of them and I got them both wrong. So I've got a score of 0. I'm not going to pass. But if I only got 3 out of the 4 questions correct and then moved on to something else, I may have a chance to be able to actually pass the exam. So I just wanted to show you what sort of what the instructions look like. Let's go ahead and launch this lab again after looking at my sorry you did not pass. All right, so now this time we're going to do it along the path of correct, or the correct path. No, I didn't set my, I normally leave this in a smaller screen. All right, so let's answer the following questions. What is 1 plus 1? We'll say 2. Now, remember, our outcome says if I get it correct, I'm going to go to harder or slightly harder. All right, now harder. Now, what's 3 plus 3? let's get that one correct. And now it's like, okay, we're done asking you the rudimentary questions. Let's take you into the basic file work. Now, at this point, I have stopped the outcome. Now I am working in, I'm working towards the end path of this exam. And so now I need to do the activities. I need to check and see whether or not I've got a file on the desktop and so on. So the key to using outcomes is that you don't just look at, let me just get this a little bigger. You don't just look at using it as the only way to get to the end of the document. You can also get to the end of the document by doing everything successfully. So you don't just take somebody to the end of the document and then leave them there and give them a 0 score. You actually prove whether or not they've been building up all along. That's what the activity path gives you, or those outcomes give you. And again, take your scoring into account. Getting the first one right is more important than getting some of the follow-up ones right. So you give that a little bit more score weight. And you can see here that I've got my scores and practices and things like that. But the other thing I wanted to show you is that when you get an answer correct or incorrect, notice I've got the choice of answered or evaluated. So instead of answered, if this allowed on-demand evaluation, now I can say when they evaluate it and it's correct, then we're going to take them someplace else. And this is a question that was brought up as a what if. Could we have an entire section of a scored lab or a lab of any kind, and where we check somebody's work, they didn't get it right. Now let's take them to a different section, different page, if you will, and we'll take them there, or we will set a variable, and then if we read that variable, we'll change the instructions or the activities based on that variable. That's how quick and easy these can be, and it is really, really simple. So you can use answered or evaluated if you are allowing evaluation. You can do correct, incorrect, answer equals an exact answer, or if the score is equal to this, or if the score is greater than that. There can be some really, really cool stuff. All right. Then there's the option of setting a variable. Now, we already have a couple of variables used in this that we could set that variable to a certain point, but we can also declare a brand new variable called Brian equal to 1. And then we can make sure that if Brian is equal to 1, then we give him a really, really easy test, because Brian can't pass tests very easy. But once you've declared that variable, now that variable is going to be valid throughout the rest of the exam. It won't be there until you actually answer the question correctly in this case. But so you have to be careful about how you use it. But it's a really, really flexible and easy to use system. Okay. So I'm going to go back to my not geography. Okay. By the way, I skipped over geography because of I think it was answer 3. Now, I should have said if answer 3 was correct, it took it to geography, and then if answer 4 was incorrect, then we or if question 4 was correct, we took it to the file work. But I didn't have that set that way. But you can do that. You can set it up so that you take them to different points within. All right. Well, that has been a very brief look at the use of randomization, grouping, and outcomes as ways of really making a unique and dynamic lab that's different for every single user who takes it. Remember, you don't have to go in and edit any of this stuff once you get it set up, because every user is going to get a brand new experience every time they take it. So even if somebody repeats, let's say we're setting up an assessment, Even if they repeat the assessment, they may be getting a completely new assessment every single time, even though you've set up one assessment. And it is, of course, appropriate to mention again that it is important to keep track of how you're scoring these things and what the scores actually mean while you're doing this. Especially when you get to high stakes, there's got to be a lot of justification for why you only got 4 questions and you had to get every single one of those 4 questions right in order to be able to get a passing score on the exam. That's where things like our professional services team and our partners can help you come up with really, really great high stakes testing. If you're doing assessments or maybe exam prep or just using a lab as a lab and then modifying that lab based on knowledge and skills, then your justification of doing that is a little bit less. Or it's not less, it's just not as it's not as defense is not as required, I guess would be the statement there. Okay. Our resources, once again, we have activity-based assessment outcomes as a document for you to check out, lods.one/ABA-outcomes. No spaces in there, and make sure outcomes is plural with an S at the end. Make sure to complete our session evaluation before, if you can fill it out before the next session, that would be great. And there's a link in the chat. Otherwise, you can go to the TMS that you use to enter the classroom and do the last activity there. Please keep up the conversation on Slack. labauthor.slack.com. It's a great place for you to communicate with your peers and also with our team and help you get the answers that you need. You can submit your feature ideas, and all of you have been doing a great job of doing that, but please go out and submit lods.one/feedback. And then do not forget to check out our upcoming events. We have weekly demos taking place. You can find out what's coming up and what's been out there at lods.one/feature demos. And if you want to see a list of all of the events that are out there, you can go to lods.one/webinars. Now, as I mentioned, we have an entire team of experts that are standing by to help you develop challenge-centric learning. If you need more information, please reach out to our team. It's our professional services team. They are out there. They've got the technology, the people, the processes, and the expertise to be able to help you with developing instructional design documentation, help you writing questions, or working with courseware and curriculum or slides or labs, you name it, they've got somebody who are out there to help you out. And as we mentioned, the lods.one/feedback, please go out there and make sure to give us feedback. And last but not least, and very not least, please go out to G2 and give us a review. I know a lot of you have already done this, but it never hurts to have you go out and do it again for the various categories of support and admin and things like that. If you do review us, take a screenshot of your review from lods.one/review us. Take that screenshot, email it to events@learnondemandsystems.com. Special launch offer. If you send that in, tell us how you'd like $25 back, gift card for Starbucks, Amazon, Chipotle, etc., and we will send you the gift card via email. And we look forward to seeing you at the rest of launch and at future events as well. So thank you for your time, and we'll see you soon.